Compassion is it's caring for one another. It's understanding. I feel like you can't really care for somebody until you take the time to really understand them. This expression I really like: seek first to understand before being understood. And it's such a noisy world that we live in. You know, I think we're always trying to stake our claim and say, listen to what I gotta say. But if you really take the time to understand where someone's coming from and really try to empathize with that, especially when you don't understand them. If you don't understand how somebody could act a certain way or say a certain thing, you know, I think if you can find some way into that understanding, it allows you to then really care about them. I don't think you can take a shortcut for compassion by skipping understanding. I don't think you can love somebody without, compassion. And I think that when you can have compassion for a complete stranger, it's something that's really beautiful. I feel like it's one thing to do it for friend, family, and people you know, but I know that if in my life, if I can do that for people that I've never met, I think that will shape my life for the better. So I think it's definitely something that I want to continue to lean into, but it takes energy. It's not, I don't think it's always natural or easy, especially in this day and age. There's a time every year that I just absolutely love, and it's Patriots Day in Boston. It's a New England holiday only, and I love traditions. I hate rituals. I just don't trust them, but I love traditions. And I grew up, as a competitive runner, and then when I decided that running in college wasn't for me, I had a little bit of an identity crisis. What do I do now? Who am I? What am I? And my uncle, who I always got along, really well with, still was running marathons, and he told me about the Boston Marathon and how it's the world's greatest marathon and how epic it was. And he'd tell me the stories, and I just knew that I wanted to run that race. And I no longer had the pressure to go out there and try to compete. Although being a competitive person, I wanted to do well, so of course I went and I trained for it. And it was such a cool experience to go to a big city like Boston, and for those days leading up to the race, never as a runner had I seen so many people coming together to support this athletic endeavor. And that's when it became clear to me that a marathon is not just an athletic event, a competitive event. It's like a testament of the human spirit. And I was hooked, and now I've run the race 13 years in a row. And to me, it's like, in the game Monopoly, they say, you must pass go before collecting your $200. I feel like I can't really start my year until my year begins on Patriots Day. And no matter how fast or slow I run, crossing that finish line is just a testament that I am alive, I can do this, and I will do this. And I'm going to celebrate the human spirit with all these other people. And because you have to run fast enough to qualify for Boston, it's something that people put so much time and effort and energy into. And to be around all these people that care so much and feel so honored and privileged to be able to do this thing, and you're doing that with 30,000 people together, there's such a positive energy around that. And the whole city celebrates that day. People are off from work. 1 million spectators line the course from start to finish. 1 million people cheering for you. You run through Wellesley College, which is an all-girls college, and I swear to God, you run through, it's called the Scream Tunnel. You feel like you're at a Justin Bieber concert, and you're Justin Bieber, and you're just this runner, and they just make you feel so special. And that's like a microcosm of how the whole city makes you feel on that day. And you're 13 miles into the race. You're sticky and covered in Gatorade and goo, and you're just disgusting and sweaty. And all these girls are hanging out there saying, "I want to kiss a runner. I want to kiss a runner." And all these guys are kissing the girls, and the girls are loving it. And this year there are two girls at the end of the tunnel that have this. They're wrapped in like a cardboard billboard sign, and it says, "If you run fast enough, we drop the sign." And the funny thing is they're buck naked under this cardboard sign, and there are these two cops right behind them, but they don't care. It's just, they're just there to support. And the whole city is just all about this race, and I get to celebrate it with my family. Every year, they haven't missed a year. My dad and my stepmom have been my support crew for 13 years, and to get to share that with family is just so special. And we have these great meals with friends and family and other runners that I know that are there. And a couple of years ago, we had like 18 people at the post-race celebration dinner. And it's just such a celebration of the human spirit. And most importantly, in the year of the bombing, I was there, and people asked me, what that was like. Are we worried about the sound at all? Or is that not worried about it? Okay. Come back to that. So I was there at Boston for the year of the bombing, and people asked me what it was like. And I say it was just like every other Boston Marathon I'd ever run until it wasn't, And I remember I was up in my hotel room, which was just a quarter mile from the finish. It was right there. And my parents, because they had been out cheering all morning, hadn't had anything to eat. So they said they were going to go out to grab some lunch. And where they were going, I said, great, if I feel up to it, I'll meet you there. And I recovered very quickly that year from the race. I usually need a few hours lying on my back until I feel ready to go, but I was ready to go. And before I went out to meet them, I said, I'm just going to turn on the TV and to see, watch the race coverage, see what's happening. And I turned on the TV, and the blast had just happened seconds before. And the first thing that went through my mind was, I wonder if the other channels are covering this. Such a bizarre, silly thought. And every channel's on every news channel, and I couldn't believe it. And so immediately I start trying to call my parents, because I realized that they were right across the street at a restaurant from where the second blast was, on Boylston Street. And I don't know if you all remember, but they were talking about how the cell phones went down and you couldn't get a hold of anybody, and the call was going through, but they weren't answering. So I'm like, why wouldn't they answer? Why wouldn't they? And so I was just so scared about, were they involved in the blast? What was happening? And when I couldn't get a hold of them, I went out into the streets to go try to find them and get there. And I'll never forget it. It was, if you've ever seen footage of people walking around New York after one of the towers had been hit, just the looks of confusion, of fear, people crying, people panicking, it was like that. Because nobody knew whether we were in the middle of another 9/11 at the time, or whether it was just two jerks with backpack bombs. And I hate to say this, but which luckily it was, because, after 9/11, that it could always be worse. And I remember seeing them come across this pedestrian bridge, seeing them walking up there. And I was so relieved. I've never hugged them so hard in my life. And the whole city was on lockdown. And normally Patriots Day, that Monday, is a day of celebration, like I said. And all the bars are full, all the restaurants are full, and the human spirit is just... And now all of a sudden there's a 13-block crime scene. And there are armed guards, and I don't mean armed like sidearmed, I mean full-on combat fatigue, army fatigue. And I'm like, where do these people come from? There's armored tanks on every corner. And all of a sudden you went from the happiest day of the year in Boston to, something that looked like a war zone. Ambulances as far as you could see down Newbury Street. They locked down all of the hotels, nobody in or out. You had to have a photo ID and a room key to get in or out of any of the hotels. Finally that night, when they let the city kind of open back up, except for this 13-block crime scene, normally all the bars are full, the city's bustling. You could have heard a pin drop. And it was just such a somber experience. It forever, changed what that race was and what it meant. And then to come back the next year, to see a city determined to take back their race, and a human spirit that refused to quit. It gives me chills just to think about it, and how special it felt to be part of that. They have a speaker series, where some of the world's best athletes and people that have run the race for decades will come and talk. The race director spoke the day before the race, and he told his story how his family was in the grandstands right across from the first blast. And it's been his tradition over the last 29 years to run the Boston Marathon every year after, the race was underway and everything was successful. So he's in a state patrol car out to Hopkinton to run into the city, which is how, the race course goes. And he hears news of the blast, and the trooper does a 180 and speeds back into the city. And he goes, to the medical tent. He's trying to get into the medical tent. He says, I got to see my family. I've got to make sure that they're okay. And, he said, nobody into the medical tent. And he says, I'm the race director. It's my race. And the cop looks at him and says, it's not your race anymore, Dave. And this is the guy that's, been in charge of the race for a quarter of a century. He's run it for 29 consecutive years. And he got up there and he said, this year we take back the race. We take back the city, and everybody stood up and roared and cheered. And because of, what happened, he didn't start the race that year until every last runner crossed the finish line. So he started at sunset and ran in the dark from this rural town, Hopkinton, to the city. And a few of us were out drinking at this pub. And we, the news got around, hey, Dave's coming in. And he had his, group of 3 or 4 buddies, runners that were running with him. And we went out to the finish line and greeted him at 10:30 at night, and that was just so special, to be a part of that year. And then in years, after that, you heard about all the people that lost limbs and almost died. Well, the mobility impaired people start first in the race. And to have the honor, the privilege of running by people that were running on one leg, and a prosthetic leg, to run that race and cheer them on, thank them, that was incredibly special. Such a privilege to be able to run by them and give your support, And 13 years of that race, to have so many memories and experiences there, and then to be a part of history, at first for worse, and then secondly for better, and more than for better. I mean, what they did that day by attacking that race was give all of us a chance to, show that the human spirit cannot be beat and that love wins, Less than 1% of the world's population will ever run a marathon. That's a statistic. And 2 years ago, I remember they were saying on the news that 30% of people involved in the blast, that were injured in the blast, ran the Boston Marathon that year. And these are people that lost limbs. These are people that weren't even runners. These are people that were just spectators, and they became runners to run that race. And on that same year, there was a couple. One woman had lost both of her legs, and then her husband had lost one. She had been through like 19 surgeries, 19 operations. And he runs that race that year. And I remember running by him and, giving him a pat on the back and cheering him on. And I'm up in my hotel room again, in contrast to when I turned on the TV a few years prior and saw the blast. I turn on the TV and I see a newscaster interviewing him with his wife there in a wheelchair. And after crossing the line, he gets down on one knee and proposes to her. And the newscaster starts bawling his eyes out. And newscasters are supposed to be objective. So I look at that, and I look at 13 years of running that race. And I'll run it every year that I'm able to be fast enough to qualify. I won't miss it for the world. That's the happiest I've ever been. First thing that pops into my mind it was very difficult, watching my parents, relationship fall apart. When you're a kid, you think you look to your parents as, an example, for what a loving relationship should be. But unfortunately, kids might do that, but people are imperfect, and we do the best that we can. And I certainly have no blame towards my parents, but it was still very difficult to watch the relationship, fall apart. And, I had this idea of my parents, as these terrific, heroic, and wonderful people individually, but together I just saw them bringing out the worst in one another. And that was the most painful thing for me to watch as a kid. And I just remember I just wish that they could break up with love. They fell in love once. Why can't they fall out of love with love and respect and, and care for one another? I don't know, maybe the wounds went too deep. Maybe there was too much time, spent, and it was just too personal. I don't know. But to respect their privacy and I'm going to spare this, some of the specific details, but I'll just say that they've been apart for, 15 years now, and they're both incredibly happy and doing incredibly well. And it's affirming to look at it and say, these are the people that I always thought, I knew you were. It's been so nice to see that. And them parting was the best thing for them. I just wish it had been done in a more peaceful way, with more love and respect and care for one another. And it was very difficult for me to watch that. And it makes me want to be incredibly compassionate. To go back to your first question about compassion, it makes me want to be incredibly compassionate when dealing with someone else's emotions and someone else's heart. It's such a fragile and beautiful thing, the heart, and it puts up walls very easy. And it's such a beautiful thing to share with one another and to be able to access. It's a privilege to be able to access someone else's heart, and an absolute necessity to be able to access your own. And it's just seeing the way that they broke up makes me want to be very intentional and careful and compassionate when dealing with someone else's heart. I certainly hope there's nothing unrepairable about me. I am a very optimistic person, and I love a good project. So if there was something unrepairable and it was essential to my being, what would be the point of getting up in the morning? If you can't make changes, if you can't shape and mold who you are, then why are we here? To answer your question, is there anything unrepairable? I don't know. There's certain things that I feel like I haven't figured out yet, that I haven't been able to do that successfully. Maybe even things I feel like a failure at. I haven't figured out, or into romantic relationships. I haven't figured that out. It's a source of a lot of anxiety for me, and in the past it's been a source of loneliness. Conquering the loneliness, feeling or bug was a big one. Now I really enjoy dating. I in sales and business, or in recruiting, it's called sorting leads. So I like to joke with people, and I'm sorting leads. I love to date. I love to meet new people and go on all these dates. And one day I'm sure I'll find somebody I click with, and we'll dive in again to another relationship. So I'm excited for when that day comes. Yet I can't help but sometimes feel like a failure in that realm of my life. And God, I sure hope that, it's not because there's something broken there that's unrepairable. I feel ready. I feel open. It just hasn't happened yet. Figuring out who you are is, I think, our greatest mission, because when you do, and when you own it and love yourself for it, you are untouchable. Nobody can take that away from you. You are going to be a magnet towards other people, and you're not alone if you don't know who you are, because most of us don't. And most of us spend our lives not knowing. But each time you can figure out a piece and own it and love yourself for it, people are going to be drawn to you because they're seeking the same thing. Confidence is seen, arrogance is shown. And when you know who you are, there's a confidence there, and it's attractive, and it's sexy. And who you are is always enough, as long as you are truly you. You might never achieve something that goes into a history book or a record book. You might never be on the news or have, a Wikipedia page about you, or crack 1,000 friends on Facebook or 100 followers on Instagram, and none of that matters. It's another saying. I love sayings, because certain sayings that are true are like just simple ways to bring all the bullshit and crap and bring it all back to the truth. It's much better to be somebody that's worth knowing than to be somebody well known. And if you know who you are and you love yourself for that, I guarantee you that you are worth knowing. I had the privilege of working on a project that was about people that were taking a huge risk in their life, or making a big change, taking a leap of faith. And without going off on too much of a tangent, one of the most interesting people who, on a quest to find out who he really was, he didn't speak out loud for 21 years, 22 years, and he refused to ride in any motorized vehicle for 27. And he just felt like it was something that he had to do. Forget how someone could think that that's what they needed to do. Read his book, his story. His name is John Francis Planet Walker. That's his moniker, and he has a couple books, and they're worth reading. He's given TED Talks. But I had the privilege of interviewing him. 4.5 hours of interviews. And he leans into the camera, and I asked him the same question. I said, what advice do you have to somebody out there who's a young person, and they feel like they need to make a change, or they feel like they're trying to figure out who they are? And he says, you have to figure out who you are and be that authentic person, no matter what anybody else is telling you. And it's such a simple thing to say, such a hard thing to do. But if you can do that, everything else will fall into place. He was the most peaceful, joyful person I've ever met. And you just felt relaxed in his company. And until you figure out who you are, and until you can find the courage to love yourself for who you are, relax. You're not going to do it if you take yourself too seriously.